I don't know. Right? The problem is when you're in an enclosed space, and the planet is an enclosed space from a military standpoint, especially when we're talking nuclear weapons and advanced weapon systems. When you're in an enclosed space with a weapon, with an enemy, the worst thing you can do is scare the hell out of them. Right? This was a standard doctrine during the Cold War, that the absolute worst thing that you could do in the Cold War was to shoot down an enemy spy satellite. Why? Because there's only one reason you would shoot down someone's spy satellite, because you're getting ready to attack them and you don't want them to see what's happening. It was taken as a matter of faith that if US or Soviet activity resulted in a shoot down of either one side's spy satellite capabilities, that it was going to trigger an immediate all launch. And frankly, that's really the only right thing to do, right? I mean, so your satellite is over Russia and suddenly it goes black. Well, that's probably because the Russians are rolling back the silo doors and you've got a whole lot of hell coming at you in 45 minutes. So the only thing you can do is hit the button and make sure your stuff gets off before their first strike lands. Right? This is all standard mutual assured destruction doctrine. Now, the reason I'm going into all of that, a lot of the proponents of cyber war that I run across these idiots all the time, and they go, well, what if the Chinese, I apologize if this is a bad example, but this is not my example, and I hear this all the time, okay? I don't think it's likely, but you go, what if the Chinese decided they were going to take Taiwan? And so what they did is that they launched a cyber attack against the American Carrier Task Force group that hangs out in that area to prevent that sort of thing. They launched a cyber attack to blind it. Well, what would happen is that they would have the blind Mike Tyson in their backyard, right? The Chinese are not stupid. The people who say, well, what if the Chinese did this, are stupid. But the Chinese would never be stupid enough to do that, right? Because what happens when you've got an American nuclear-armed carrier task force group and it's blind and it's in your backyard? What do you think happens to you? You get nuked. Or maybe you don't get nuked. Maybe what happens is there's a whole bunch of frantic phone calls going, you better tell us what's happening in like 3 seconds, okay? That's probably what happens. But it's a terrible idea. Blinding a superpower, even temporarily, invites massive retaliation. If you don't believe me, email me after this, and I can point you to some amazing links that stuff has been becoming declassified about some of the big mistakes that happened during the 1980s, during like Able Baker Exercise 83, in which the US and the Soviets almost accidentally launched on each other because of exactly this kind of misunderstandings, right? And during the height of the Cold War, yes, when the US had problems with spy satellites, they would, call the Soviets and go, we just lost a spy satellite. We know it wasn't you. It's okay. And the reason for doing that was because, right? Okay, so let's see. If you're the Soviets and you have intelligence operatives inside the U.S., which they were all over us, right? And they hear that one of our spy satellites went dark, the first thing they're going to do is think, I wonder if they're going to think we did it and attack us. Let's get ready. Highly messed up situation, right? But anyway, the issue with the blind Mike Tyson effect is that the only situation where blinding your opponent works is if you're Mike Tyson. Now, if you're in a room with a network manager and you're Mike Tyson, sure, you can turn the lights out before you beat the snot out of the guy. But you know what? You don't really have to turn the lights out of the guy, off because you're going to beat the snot out of the guy either way. In fact, if you're Mike Tyson, you're going to leave the lights on because the view is so much more satisfying. That's an issue. Okay, so the who would win anyhow question is really the crucial military question surrounding cyber warfare, which is why it's bullshit. Because cyber warfare is only useful in one of two situations. One is you're going to win anyway, and two is it's some kind of a scorched earth defense, which people don't do that anymore, right? I suppose that there's, hopefully they don't do that anymore. I shouldn't say that, but most of the countries that are looking at scorched earth type scenarios are not high-tech superpowers. But if you're, I suppose if you were the government of Liechtenstein and you thought that the United States was going to run you over, you could have all these logic bombs on all of your networks so that we couldn't get your tax information after we stomped you flat. So the point again is, cyber war is only valuable to the player that's most likely to win in the first place. I keep coming back to that because that's really what we're talking about. right? It means that the only country in the world that is most likely to use cyber war is the United States. The Russians might. The French, I can't see them doing that, right? They would be too busy arguing about internationalization of the fact that it was done in English. But, I can't see it happening from anybody except for the United States. Now, the good news is, well, I guess this is good news. The good news is that if the United States uses cyber war on anybody, they were going to win anyway. So, what's the difference? Okay. Wrapping up here. So, as far as the future of cyber war, and this is a place where I'm going to go way out on a limb here, I just don't think cyber war has a whole lot of a future. In the next couple of decades or so, it's really not going to make a big difference until or unless we get more highly technological, mutually opposed superpowers. And I actually don't see that evolving. Right? I suppose that we could get in a situation where there's a Cold War-style standoff between the United States and China in the future, but that's most likely to be an economic standoff because both sides involved in that, or at least certainly the Chinese, aren't stupid enough to get into a Cold War-type situation because it's bad for business. So my thinking at this time is that it's completely pointless for a superpower to develop cyber war techniques to attack a non-superpower because they're just going to get squished in the first place. And the hidden agenda behind this is that I know for a fact that the United States is spending ridiculous amounts of money right now in covert budgets about developing cyber war type stuff. It's not huge amounts of money, but considering the value or the likely value of cyber war, any dollars spent in this direction is largely ridiculous. But there's a more important point than just the money, okay? And it's a moral issue. And that's really the thing I want to get people to think about and the reason I've been talking about this, other than just that it's fun to make fun of the government. At a certain point, you have to ask, when are you carrying out warfare against civilian infrastructure and civilian targets? I know it's not popular, and nowadays the notion of total war, basically nobody fights a war anymore that's not a total war. Since the Second World War, all wars have been total wars, and well, actually probably since the First World War. All wars are total wars. All the targets are civilian infrastructure if you're talking about cyber war. Most of the military networks are not well managed enough to be remote manageable. Okay? So if you're talking about crashing a country's automatic teller network or crashing their phone system or crashing this or crashing that prior to launching some kind of an attack, what you're talking about is non-military targets, and that is actually a war crime. And one of the other reasons I wanted to mention this is because, contrary to global opinion, not all of us Americans think that committing war crimes, as our government has been doing lately, is a good thing or is a good idea. I'm not going to apologize because it wasn't my fault. But I am deeply concerned about the state of the political leadership of the United States and their attitude of responsibility towards this issue, right? So if I were not a U.S. citizen, if I were on the potential receiving end of a U.S. cyber attack, I would be deeply concerned, and I would be worried about this. And what I would be doing is trying to encourage my political leaders, wherever possible, to approach this as, by the way, Mr. President, if you guys were to do something to our civilian electronic infrastructure, we would consider that an act of war. Not that it's going to matter, because you're going to lose anyway, but it's best to get that stuff out. Okay, so some broad predictions. Cybercrime is a huge problem. It's going to grow vastly worse. The interesting thing is, as cybercrime becomes a vastly worse problem, we're talking about these kinds of penetrations like the clickjacking and stuff. These are being used for commercial purposes. The commercial imperative, the commercial impetus is going to actually drive faster than the military impetus, right? Again, if we were the cyber warriors and we were preparing to launch attacks against the United States, I would be extremely annoyed by the fact that the guys who are selling malware are 10 years ahead of me in terms of the quality of my weapons, right? Those guys are much more sophisticated. And that's a bad situation to be in if you're trying to actually prepare to carry out military operations in a field. Cyber terror, fascinating. Fascinating, open question. I would love to hear what people think about this one. Why? has cyber terror not fulfilled its potential to be absolutely horrible? I have no clue. We'll see. Cyber espionage, it's business as usual. The spies are going to continue doing the right thing. Oh, by the way, I always fantasize about this wonderful dialogue, between the cyber warriors and the cyber spies, right? Okay, so we're down in the command bunker. We're about to launch the attack on the United States or whatever. We've just launched the attack, or the attack is about to go. The Generalissimo says fire, right? And they click crash on the crash button. The U.S.'s networks, command and control networks, all go boom, right? At which point the chief of the espionage service says, okay, well, that's it for us. I'm going to go home. Well, what do you mean? We can't give you any more intelligence because we used that network that you just crashed to carry all of our data back and forth. You just blinded us, you idiot, right? That's a problem. It's a big problem. The cyber spies and the cyber warriors are, by definition, in mutual opposition. In fact, all the characters that are playing in this landscape are in mutual opposition. When you talk to people from the media or you run into people who are kind of throwing all this cyber badness stuff together, it's absolutely critical to get them to understand that you're talking about 4 competing agendas all playing in the same battle space. Absolutely critical to understand that, right? And then cyber warfare is largely vapor. So to summarize it and wrap up here, I think no matter how we slice it, the critical civilian infrastructure is still going to be under attack. It's mostly going to be under attack by, the scattershot, random stuff. We all know this is going to be a problem. It's going to continue to be a problem. But I don't think you need to worry about cyber war a whole lot. And maybe that's some good news. Maybe think about cyber war as just, another one of those dumb research projects that U.S. government agencies like to spend millions and millions of dollars on. If that's the case, hey, let's all try to get some of those cool Department of Cyber Warfare t-shirts that we can wear to the next Hack in the Box. So that's what I had to say. Thank you. I can field questions if you've got them. Yeah.
Hello, I am Roberto Pretoni from zoneh.org. I respect your point of view, but somehow I don't agree. And I have several questions. Maybe I can find only a couple of them. I guess that basically the problem it is that you are representing the future wars only at traditional warfare level. I give you an example. You told that in case of cyber terror, it's basically a matter of annoyed kids who are DDoSing targets. And the threat is only by targeting civilian infrastructures, which eventually turns in explosion. Well, it happened that I come from Estonia, and my website and my company, they run on a 100 megabit connection. During the cyber war between Estonia and Russia, my business was totally offline, the country was offline, the economy was crushed, and the people, they were desperate. So if it is not cyber warfare or a cyber attack, how would you call it?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I mean, obviously, there's some facts here that I can't argue with, but it's interesting. I believe that the current state of what people have been disclosing was that it was not a Soviet sponsorship, and that's something I'm sure we could argue about, and I'd love to do that. My understanding was that it was not Soviet government sponsored, that it was a bunch of individuals who were basically having fun. That brings up the question then of, was it state sponsored?
It's also my opinion. My opinion is that it was not state sponsored, and there was writing about it. But that's the point, actually. The internet allows common people to conduct military operation over the internet with significant results.
That's where we have to disagree. Okay, whoever it was, the hackers who were doing the DDoS or whatever, these ordinary civilians who were engaging this were not engaging in military operations. They did not have soldiers. They were not capturing ground. They were not capturing territory. They were, however, doing economic damage. And that's the one place where, this does get kind of interesting. Unless you can point to a place where economic damage is going to equate to military advantage, it's not exactly warfare. It's something else. And you could carry out economic warfare from a scorched earth standpoint is really what we're talking about. I don't know the term for that. In fact, I would love to know a good term for that. But you understand what I'm saying. An individual, yes,